Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to first off introduce myself. My name is Bruce McKenzie, and I'm the Acting Vice Chancellor at Lincoln University, and I'm extraordinarily pleased to be able to welcome everyone to our seminar this morning on climate smart food production. This is a really important topic for all of us, and as I've looked at the different topics that are going to be presented today in both sessions, it's a fascinating range of things that we're going to be discussing this morning. I would love to be here for the whole thing, but I do have some meetings back at Lincoln later, so I'll be leaving at 9:30, so I won't be able to make session B. But before I get into my formal welcome for everyone, I would like to thank a few people. I'd like to thank the president of the show, Chris Herbert, and I'd like to thank our MC, Sarah Piriam, who's down here at the front. I'd also like to give a very, very big thank you to our sponsors and our seminar partner, ANZ Bank. Thank you so much. We do appreciate that. Now, I want to talk just a little tiny bit about the importance of education in solving some of our problems that we're facing around climate change and what that might mean for agriculture. So if we look at session A, which is entitled The Opportunity in Our Changing World, a Global Outlook, that's clearly going to give us some understanding or at least an introduction to some of the opportunities. And what's really important, at least in my mind, is that everybody in this room will be aware that right at the moment we do have some pretty strong indications that climate change is happening right now. It's not something that's going to be coming in 10 or 20 years. It's happening right now. And this is going to bring us some opportunities, and it's going to bring us some disruptions. And those things are actually happening right now as well. Now, I'd like to comment on the importance of education to help us solve some of the issues that we're facing. As I said, climate change is going to bring many opportunities to New Zealand. And if we look at the climate models that say what's likely to happen in New Zealand, nobody's 100% sure what's going to happen. But it's quite likely that we're going to see an increase in CO2 levels, which we've already started seeing. And we're going to see some much likely more variable rainfall, although over much of the country it will be either up a little bit or down a little bit. There's not meant to be huge changes. So one of the things within New Zealand is we'll be able to counteract some of the variability in rainfall with irrigation, because New Zealand actually has an awful lot of water. It's not always in the right place at the right time. Now, if we think about what's going on throughout the developed world, there's a big shift to a flexitarian diet. I'm not going to talk too much about veganism, for instance, but there is a big shift to a flexitarian diet where we're looking at consuming less meat. Now, I'm not sure that that's something that I'm particularly fond of, because I do love a really nice lamb chop or a really nice steak. But the flexitarian diet is something that's becoming a lot more popular, and when you look at the stats, it's pretty surprising. Now, that brings us huge opportunities, particularly in the South Island. In the cropping regions in New Zealand, one of the crops that's really important for us is peas. Most of you will be aware that pea is a grain legume. Virtually all the grain legumes grow extremely well in Canterbury, and we've done a lot of work at Lincoln University on a wide range of legumes. In fact, I did my PhD in the mid-1980s on lentils. Might sound a funny thing to do a PhD on, but it's a fascinating crop, produces a high-quality protein, it produces a very high yield in New Zealand, and it doesn't require irrigation in most seasons. Now, there's a range of these legumes that grow really well here. We're talking about peas, we're talking about faba beans, we're talking about chickpeas, and with another degree or two of temperature increase. And I'm not standing here saying temperature increase is good. I'm just saying it's going to happen, so we might as well use it. We'll be able to grow soybeans consistently and at high yields. So there's a lot of opportunity for the production of high-value, high-protein crops in Canterbury. Now, if we go and look at what's going to be talked about in session B, which is entitled Climate Smart Food Production, again, education is one of the keys to success. And I'm going to use Lincoln as an example here. Not that we're the best in this by any ways or means, but we do a lot of work with a wide range of partners. And we've got some really good examples of things that we've done to help improve the environmental outcomes on many of our farming enterprises. And just a couple of examples include our partnership with Ravensdown, which has been really productive for us, the development of ClearTech and EcoN are two things that have reduced nitrate leakage on farms. If you look at the Forages for Reduced Nitrate Leakage program that we're part of, along with a wide range of partners, including Plant and Food, Ag Research, Manaki Whenua Land Care Research, Dairy New Zealand, the development of some of the processes in that particular MB-funded research program are pretty amazing. There are some significant reductions in nitrate losses there. And finally, I'd like to mention some of the work that Professor Phil Hume has done. And this is really interesting stuff, looking at why do non-native species that come to New Zealand, and we have a lot of non-native species here, and we have more arriving every day, even though we don't want that to happen. Why do some of these plants become weeds and some not become weeds? It's some really interesting work that's going on. So to me, there's no question at all that education can clearly help us produce more sustainable agricultural systems. Now, finally, a key for the future, and this is one of the things that I really, really like about our national science challenges here. If you look at our land and water, one of the key objectives of that particular program is to find the most appropriate use for our different land types around New Zealand. That will provide huge benefits for us, because there's no question we have some farming types run in places they probably should not be. So, clearly education is a key to more sustainable food production systems, but solving these problems will only occur with all of us working together. That has got to be the key, all of us working together, because these are big problems. They're not going to be solved by one person or one group of people. So I'm going to leave it there. And again, I'd like to welcome everybody to the seminar series this morning. And I'd like now to hand over to Chris Herbert, president of the show. Thank you, Chris.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here to support us on the opening morning of the show and our second Blink Innovation Series. The New Zealand Agricultural Show hosts one of the strongest rural communities going and has done so for the past 156 years. It is our duty to push forward into the future, asking the big questions, exploring prevalent topics, and having those tough discussions. As we are all aware, the farming community has been subject to a lot of adverse press of late surrounding sustainability, climate change, and positive farming. It is important that we take part in and support events such as these seminars. Where was I? To remain informed to this and question the status quo, and to discuss with our peers the best way forward, the best way of remaining viable financially and environmentally. With the industry continuing to face a tough future, we can always learn more, do better, and through this, listening to the opinion of others, we find the best way to achieve this. Thank you for taking part in the conversation today, and I hope you all have a great show. I'd now like to hand over to Scott Patterson, Senior Manager of Canterbury West Coast ANZ. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Patterson, based in Christchurch as a Senior Manager for the ANZ Canterbury West Coast Agri team. ANZ are very proud to be associated with the Agricultural Innovation Hub and the Blink Seminar Series. Looking to the future, continuing to adapt to meet the expectations of our customers and the regulators is essential. Given the role we play in every community, ANZ sees this as a real opportunity. As a nation, we face some real challenges around environmental sustainability, management of fresh water, and our economic prosperity. This is front of mind for many of our customers. We believe it is really important we have informed opinions, show leadership, and support our customers and communities that aspire to be more environmentally sustainable. ANZ New Zealand made a recent submission to the Ministry of Environment's Action for Healthy Waterways discussion. ANZ sees improving sustainability standards to internationally recognised levels as crucial to meeting the demands of global consumers. As well as this, securing the long-term future of many of New Zealand's export categories and tourism. For these reasons, ANZ New Zealand's submission supports the broad intention to stop water quality getting worse and setting the country on a path to better fresh water in a generation. Adopting environmental and social principles shows the world how committed to sustainability New Zealand and New Zealand businesses are. There's a real opportunity for New Zealand to lead the world in sustainable business practices and continue to thrive as a premium food producer and destination. Where there is innovation and world-class standards in place, we promote further innovation, encourage investment, and most importantly, attract and grow talent. ANZ also urges analysis of the effect of these proposed changes. All communities will be affected and will need clarity on the economic and social impacts and, importantly, the cost of change. Rural communities in particular will need time, advice and expertise. Overall, New Zealand must ensure all its communities are well supported to adapt to and thrive within the policy proposals. ANZ have also joined the Aotearoa Circle, a voluntary initiative where we join government and private sector leaders to work together to protect New Zealand's advantage in natural resources for the long term. ANZ also contributed to their Sustainable Finance report. Our views on sustainable finance also featured in a recent New Zealand Herald article on the 31st of October, featuring Mid-Canterbury dairy farmers Greg and Rachel Roadley. The Roadleys are a great example of a couple who have challenged themselves to showcase good sustainability practices. This is the mindset our industry needs if it is to prosper and showcase best practice. But as a finance sector, we need to take best practice and benchmark it against recognised and consistent measures. A sustainable primary sector is vital to New Zealand's economic well-being, but achieving this goes beyond investing in environmental initiatives on the farm. It involves a significant system change at many levels, including the finance sector. The challenge for all of us is to take this through to grassroots businesses to ensure we have confidence to invest, can incentivise the right behaviour, make real change, and most importantly, deliver what consumers want both on and offshore. This leads nicely in today's seminar sessions. As earlier mentioned, the seminar session A, The Opportunity in Our Changing World, a Global Outlook. And this session will explore the potential scenarios and implications of a changing climate and what it could mean for food production in New Zealand. Seminar session B is around climate smart food production. This session is about understanding the opportunity, hearing from others how they're approaching the opportunities and dealing with the challenges to adapt, plus importantly protecting our natural resources and food production for future generations. Thank you again everybody, and I hope you enjoy today's sessions.
Kia ora. Thank you so much to Bruce and Chris and of course Scott. Thank you so much for opening today's Blink Breakfast seminar. My name is Sarah Perriam and I will be your MC for this session and next. So please sit back, we've got some fantastic guests that we're going to hear from shortly. Firstly, I just want to take the time to thank ANZ for sponsoring the breakfast this morning. And Scott, I was looking to build a house and I saw that ANZ offer interest discounts on Homestar grants. So if you are looking at building and you want a warmer, drier, healthier home, not paid to say that by ANZ, but you actually are putting your money where your mouth is across the entire sector, and I appreciate your honesty in that opening speech. It was fantastic. Thank you so much, Bruce Mackenzie. I have been a tenant now for 12 months at Blink, following my introduction to the Blink team this time last year. And I'm extremely proud to be a tenant at Blink. And throughout today, I'll be explaining a bit more about what Blink does and how wherever you are based around the world, you can actually follow the awesome work that they're doing through all the events that they are filming and have on demand for you to never miss out on the conversation. Thank you so much, Chris, for opening today's show. I know it's a long time sitting in the wings waiting to your role as president, so please enjoy the next 3 days. It's a fantastic opportunity to represent Canterbury to the world and to New Zealand, so have a great 3 days. The show is my Christmas. I absolutely love the show. I've been coming now for nearly 10 years, and it is absolutely like a massive family. So thank you so much. I look forward to it. So just so I can run through a bit of the format of the day, the first seminar series is about the global outlook, our macro. What does the world want from us, and how is New Zealand going to respond? We have 3 fantastic panellists that are going to present a 10-minute presentation each, and then they will take to the stage in a panel format. We'll have about 15-20 minutes to run through Q&As, so please don't be shy. Please challenge them, because I will if you don't. The reason I enjoy being a part of the Blink community and also the New Zealand agricultural community in my role that I play in the media element to it is that we have to challenge status quo if we're going to move forward and seek these opportunities. I just wanted to set the scene by putting some questions to you that we can actually start to form some ideas, because no one person has the answer. How are we going to meet these consumer preferences, and as Bruce was saying, the flexitarian, where they value meat higher but less of it? How do we harness our strengths and secure our future position globally? What does brand New Zealand look like, and how are we going to work together to capture these value premiums? But more so, what are the best options for transitioning to a lower emission profile land use? What does that look like? How are we financially going to support farmers to make those changes? And for what tools are we going to have and nurture that knowledge extension from the wonderful work that happens at Ag Research, which we'll hear shortly from Robin Dines. We have some very big questions. And there is going to be no answer, and there's going to be no answer from old solutions. As they say at Blink, it's not Blink, sorry, it's Einstein. We can't actually solve these new challenges with old solutions. We have to start to look outside the square. So in this session, we're going to explore the potential scenarios and implications of this changing climate, what it could mean for food production in Aotearoa, what the brand New Zealand is going to look like, and how are we going to lead and adapt these changes and remain a key food basket for the world, as well as seen as one of the biggest innovators of the world. So it is with my pleasure I'm going to run through the bios of the 3 speakers, and they'll come up here and then one by one present to you before the panel. So I'd like to invite to the stage Susan Kilsby from ANZ. Susan has just recently rejoined ANZ after her time at NZX, where she headed up a team of agricultural analysts, providing market intelligence to many leading global dairy businesses by way of regular reports, news and online tools. Susan's role now at ANZ Bank is the agricultural economist, where she took that role up last October, and she is going to talk to us today about transforming New Zealand agriculture. We can just welcome you up to the stage. And following Susan, we have Dr. Robin Dines in the research community. She will be known to many of you. Robin's going to be speaking about adapting to a changing climate in land-based agriculture. She's a science impact leader and farm systems scientist at Ag Research based here at Lincoln. Her current research interests across pastoral sectors and focused on understanding the opportunities for farm management and new technologies to contribute to a lower emissions future. Robin leads the Next Generation Systems program within the National Science Challenge and Our Land, Our Water. I've been I really enjoy every time Robin speaks, and she sort of pushes our thoughts outside the square. So it's going to be great. And following that, my fellow Blink tenant, that's Ross Milne from Leafed Foods. What Ross is going to present to you is some of the most interesting and innovative stuff I've seen recently in the agricultural sector. Ross is the General Manager responsible for developing the compelling and competitive leaf protein-based solution to address the challenges that New Zealand's food and fibre sector is facing. Ross, together with his team at Leafed Foods, are working with New Zealand's research institutes, universities and world-leading experts to ensure that Leafed Foods can be successful from concept through to delivery and a plant-based protein opportunity for farmers. So I'd like to introduce first to you Susan Kilsby.
So how we produce, not what we produce, is going to be the value add in the future. Now it's early in the morning, so I'll say that again. How we produce, not what we produce, will be the value add. And by that, I mean we'll be paid different prices at the farm gate level based on the actions and what we're doing on our farms. Traditionally, what we've done within our farms has we've typically seen that as our own business, and within our businesses in general. But now we're seeing much more, eyes on how we're doing things. Are we running our farms and our businesses in a sustainable manner? So it's not just agriculture. We're seeing this, in general. We're seeing this trend towards ESG, environmental and social governance. So are we doing things in a sustainable manner? Now we're seeing a push from regulatory actions driving us this way, but much more importantly, we're seeing a pull from customers. Customers wanting to know what they're buying is not just going to be nutritionally good for them, but it also isn't having a negative impact somewhere else along the lines. Now, to understanding our customers and connecting with our customers is really, really important if we want to think the way our customers think about how we are operating. And it's, people have everyone has different views on things, and often what we're already doing on farms here in New Zealand it goes a long way towards some of those things customers are looking for. For instance, we're not always marketing the fact that our animals are free range. This time last year, I had a German girl staying with me to help look after the kids while my partner tootled off to Nepal to do some walking. And she took the pony up the farm one day, and she came back and she said to me, "I don't know why anyone would be a vegetarian in New Zealand." And I was like, "Oh, why do you say that?" And she said, "Because your animals are really happy and they get to run around." She goes, "I get it in Germany where they're all locked up. You wouldn't want to eat, you wouldn't want to consume meat there. But when these animals are happy, why would you want to be a vegetarian?" So I thought that was a really interesting insight from her in that sense. We don't market that our animals are fit. I went to the US and saw a dairy farm over there that the cows were completely indoors. And the cows had escaped one day and ran 2 k's down the road, and the farmer got them back in again. He said they laid down for 2 days. They were exhausted. He said they learnt their lesson, they never tried to get out again. But it's not an attribute we tend to market. We don't market that our animals and our people live in an environment that we don't have any air pollution. 90% of the people around the world are living in polluted cities. We're not marketing the fact that the milk produced here in New Zealand is from cows that are breathing fresh air. The milk produced in India, which is the biggest milk producer in the world, as of considerably lower quality than what we're producing here. We are going to have challenges in the future around global water shortages. Water is not something we're short of in New Zealand. We may be short of water storage, and we may not fully value the access that we have to water and fully value water quality, but we're certainly not short of water like other countries are going to be. Looking forward, I think we're going to start thinking in a different way in terms of maximising output relative to input and negative outputs. So our benchmarking is going to evolve from the days we went to discussion groups and we just talked about production and we talked about nothing else. I went to one last week and sure enough, the first thing was they talked about where their cows peaked at, but then they did actually go on and start talking about some profit measures as well. But we will need to evolve to talking about how much meat and milk we're producing relative to our greenhouse gas emissions or relative to our nitrogen and phosphate runoff. If we can actually put dollar values on some of these things, it means we can actually incorporate it into one system, which would make it a lot simpler for people like me who are bankers and like everything in dollars rather than science-based. We'll need to use a lot more technology to record precision and to share data, whether it be sharing data with regulators or, more importantly, sharing data with customers. And not just data. Customers love stories. A lot of customers buy on emotions, and stories and things that really connect with them are a little bit more exciting than just data and numbers. We'll use technology to monitor individual animals to a much greater degree. I live on a small sheep and beef farm, and I'm looking forward to the technology that counts the sheep through the gate, so I don't have to do it and screw it up on a regular basis. And we'll draft the lambs for me without me having to be involved. We'll need technology that can monitor how our animals are feeling. I don't know, I think Fitbits have something on them. Maybe each one can have a Fitbit. We'll be able to use technology to control our animals through virtual fencing and the likes. But I think the future of ag is really going to reward how we produce and those that produce efficiently relative to the inputs and the negative outputs. Technology will help drive that efficiency. And in the next decade, we're going to see a lot of rapid change, but I really do hope we start to reward those who are doing the right thing within our farm gate, within our farms and orchards, to a much greater degree than just lumping everyone in together with single pricing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Now, Dr. Robin Dines.
You'll be pleased to know I was late home last night and there was apparently lamb for dinner. My dinner were the beetroot burgers, which no one had chosen to eat. The lamb was but an empty tray. So sorry I didn't get my kids to Lincoln, but they do enjoy red meat. So Sarah gave me a huge topic. We could be here all day talking about what was on my brief. So this is going to be a glide over the top, and I look forward to some challenging questions. New Zealand's climate is changing, as is the world's, and we're certainly more concerned about it perhaps now than we've ever been in the future. But here at Ag Research, most of you probably don't know, but for the last 15 years, we've been running what's called the FACE experiment. So that's the free air CO2 enrichment trial. Essentially what it is, it's in the Manawatu, it's a bunch of circles where we pump CO2 onto them every day. Now they're the only site in the world that's under grazing conditions. So our colleagues are already publishing about the impact of CO2 enrichment. And you know, there are some upsides as farmers to CO2 enrichment, and there are more four-leaf clovers to be found. So we do know for New Zealand by 2090, we will have higher temperatures, and for New Zealand, the North Island more so than the South Island. But we've got to remember that our warming is going to be less than the global average. So here is opportunity number one for us. We will have rising sea levels, we will have more extreme weather events, and we've heard a lot about droughts for the East Coast. We will have more floods, and I think for some of our rural communities, these will be challenges. Will we be able to afford to keep building flood banks into the future? So some of these things are real challenges we have to think about as a country. And we know from rainfall patterns, Bruce has already talked about it briefly, probably more winter rainfall in the South Island, and that's going to bring its own challenges. We at AgResearch are deeply concerned about the impacts for biodiversity, and it's certainly a focus for our research. We know there's more risk to localised extinction. We know warmer weather favours these exotic species, and we know that warmer weather will spread disease and pests. So coming down to us in Canterbury, we know by 2040 we could be as much as 1 degree warmer, by 2090 up to 3 degrees warmer. But also up to 35 more days that have a maximum temperature greater than 25 degrees. Now I love warm weather, I think that's an upside. And 38 less frost days in Canterbury in a year, and Bruce touched on that opportunity for Canterbury. I think this is for New Zealand and Canterbury so much about opportunity, mapping to what Susan said about the how we do things. Snowfall, it's quite a tricky one to understand in the models, but it looks like there'll be less. Bruce introduced us, as Susan did, to getting the right storage of water in the right place is going to be really big for us. We are going to have a greater fire risk, and I guess we looked to the Port Hills last year, and with absolute horror to what's happening in Australia. We're going to have more pests and weeds, but I know Bruce will educate a lot of people with the right skills to help us address that. We will have a longer growing season though, more growing degree days, earlier crop harvests. I mean, these are real opportunities for us in Canterbury. So will there be land use transition? Yes, there will be. We have a rich history in Canterbury in our mixed cropping systems, which have been highly agile. Go back and look at what John Grigg did at Long Beach. You know, he responded to the steel plough. He responded to refrigeration, and he changed that entire system back in the late 1800s. Our farmers have been doing that ever since. That was technology, that was agility in our farmers. We already have the best arable production in New Zealand. We already produce horticulture and vegetable crops here. So we know we can already do these things. What are we going to do in the future? Well, our experience of our farmers and our science, it already has the know-how. And we can map what the potential is for our future. But we need demand. We need demand for our products, and no pressure, Ross, but we need so many opportunities for our farmers to be able to capture what they are truly worth. And what sort of new business models? How is the whole of New Zealand and the rest of the world going to have to get behind making this possible? Moving now, I was asked to comment about greenhouse gas emissions. We are very efficient food producers. We are some of the most efficient in the world, and we hear that all the time. Susan talked about what others see and how others produce their food. Our milk, meat and wool comes from the finest pastures in New Zealand, and we are very efficient in how we produce that. We also know that we're under pressure as an agricultural sector because around 50% of New Zealand's emissions come from agriculture. But let's face it, there's not a lot of people live in New Zealand and we don't have a lot of industry. So let's remember that when we think about why agriculture is such a big percentage. Of our biological emissions, 80% is methane, 20% nitrous oxide. The stinger here is for every kilo of feed a ruminant produces, that's 22 grams of methane. The more we feed, the more emissions we have. We feed a lot of animals, we have a lot of emissions. We don't have a silver bullet yet, but New Zealand really does lead the world in its research into looking for those silver bullets, for the vaccines, for the inhibitors. And at AgResearch, I'm really proud of what my colleagues are doing, and it's taking a lot of persistence. So we're not there yet, but we can't give up trying, because for ruminants, a vaccine or an inhibitor would make the world of difference. So in our dairy systems, we're chasing the possible trifecta, maintaining our operating profit, reducing our effect on water quality and our greenhouse gas emissions. There's a bunch of ways we can do that, from ensuring we've got the breeding worth of the animals, animal health, the same milk production from healthy animals with less replacements, with maximum production per cow. We know a lot of what those options are. We also know we need to look carefully in our intensive systems at the nitrogen surplus. And right now we have to be really honest with ourselves about where our efficiencies are and how we're going to manage those. Are we optimising our use of our inputs, our fertiliser and our effluent? Are we substituting nitrogen fertiliser for lower nitrogen feed? Remembering that'll improve water quality but not change our greenhouse gas emissions. We know there are win-wins to be had for our dairy sector, and are hopeful a really clear trifecta will result in less total feed eaten. The Lincoln University demonstration farm, a wonderful example of what's possible. So they targeted the efficient use of nitrogen fertiliser, reduced fertiliser inputs, reduced supplement input. They reduced nitrate leaching by 25% and greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. So that business future-proofed itself for where regulation is going to take us into the future. So it's easy, we know what to do, but every farming system is different. Everyone has its own values and its own drivers, and it's challenging for these systems to embrace these drivers. So we've got to have patience, and we've got to have understanding of how big the challenges are. And we also know many farmers have already made those changes. So our challenge to our research is, what are the future opportunities for them? Sheep and beef. Well, what an industry. The choices when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions for the sheep and beef sector are far more challenging. But let's first remember that fabulous lamb that I think I had in my household last night. The quality of the meat, milk and fibre we produce is outstanding. That land that produces our meat and fibre, it's too steep, too cold, too wet or too dry to grow crops, and yet our ruminants produce amazing feed off that. Unlike dairying, we can't reduce the inputs into those farms from fertiliser and feed because those inputs are not put into those farms. They utilise the feed that they grow. And also with sheep and beef, efficiency of production is very different between our hill country breeding farms and our finishing farms. We need to suck that up, because at the end of the day, we can't have a finishing farm if we don't have breeding farms. Our breeding farms are in some of our most tough country, and they don't have the same options. They won't be as efficient, but they are still an integral part of our system. So what is it I'm saying to our sheep and beef farmers right now is make more from less. More money for the same greenhouse gas emissions is better for your pocket and better for the environment. Younger animals, finishing your animals as early as you can, looking at your ratio of trading stock to breeding stock, lambing hoggets, more twin lambs, lower mortality, once bred heifers. My colleague Scobie says, why are we not farming wallabies? Well, our farmer in South Canterbury we've been working with, he's had 2 attempts at replanting his trees, and you can imagine the expletives, wallabies keep eating them. So, Sarah, do we have to think more about the shape of our future and you know, Susan, find those markets? So, finally, I think a lot of what we're facing with climate change for our farmers will be business as usual, because it's not going to happen in a moment. Through opportunity and capacity, we will get there. Our climate is changing, yes. However, we farm in a highly variable environment. We've already experienced the seasons and the years that are to come. It's just they've been one-offs in the past. But we know how to adapt. We know how to get there. And by 2090, we'll be having more days at the beach because it'll be warmer. I predict ski passes will be cheaper because the ski season will be a little less certain. I know that we will have, Susan, the technology to know the pests, disease and weeds are coming before they get here. We will have already figured out how to store water in a way that's really effective, and we will have very efficient delivery systems that look nothing like our irrigation of today. Our land managers do have to think about how our world in which they farm is changing and how they will have to farm differently in the world ahead of us. They will be resilient now and into the future because that's the people we are. Profitability has to remain key to these businesses. Right now, future-proofing, let's face it, is about regulation and how to farm with it. Investment does have to think about what a resilient future looks like. And are we opportunity ready, and where are we going to create these opportunities? Do we have the value chain? Do we understand our consumers? Are we building the right processing? Do we have the sort of opportunities Ross is about to talk about? Because I think with all of those in place, we will transition and it will be driven by opportunity. In terms of our lowering our emissions, and that applies to me as well, I'm not a farmer, but I need to understand these things. We need to know what our targets are. We need to know the options available to reduce emissions and the impact these options have on businesses. Farmers need to be able to have the confidence to decide what to do. They need to know they've got the tools in the place and the experts available to help them. If that's all in place, I know with the right technologies, the right science, the right education, climate change adaptation is a massive opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. On that note of the wallabies, every time my father groans about rabbits, I remind him that Cromwell used to be the biggest rabbit canning hub in New Zealand, and that we should actually be looking to future opportunities. Rabbit is actually quite tasty, by the way. And on that note, handing over to Ross Milne from Leafed Foods.
Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today to talk about the future of proteins. And I was asked to speak about whether they're just a fad that'll come and go, or they're a global trend that's here to stay. Firstly, myself, so as Sarah introduced, I'm the General Manager for Leafed Foods, and what we're looking at is extracting protein from green leaf material and supplying that as a food ingredient for human consumption. As well, the leftover material, we look to have an optimized protein content that we can supply for animal feed. So it's about making the most out of what we can grow here in Canterbury. And so for that reason, we don't believe it's just a fad. I do believe it's here to stay. But what I'd like to present to you is some of the reasoning for that and how we've come to that conclusion. So bear with me, I'll start at a very high level and then get into a little bit more detail. So we've only got one world. It's the one we're on now. We don't have another one. Maybe we'll find another one someday, but that's probably not anytime soon. And at the moment, we're chewing our way through this one at a pretty incredible rate. Do you all know about Earth Overshoot Day? I heard about this only a couple of years ago. It's the day at which we use more natural resources than what the Earth can replenish within that year. And this year, it was the 29th of July. And it's getting earlier and earlier every year. So we've got to do something. And if we think about the causes of this, we typically think about fossil fuels, we think about energy production. We don't think necessarily, or not many of us think about what we have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. But if we do start to think about our food systems, which are immensely complex and resource heavy, then if we start to think about what's involved in production and transportation, manufacturing, refrigeration in supermarkets, even in your own kitchen, this all adds up to an enormous amount. On top of that, in the past decades, we're very meat hungry, right? We've come up a number of times this morning, our lamb chops and everything. Right now, we've got, or this desire for meat and dairy products involves 60 billion land animals, and that uses about half of our agricultural area. The emissions from those livestock, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, what we're all used to hearing about, are reportedly responsible for between 18 and 20% of greenhouse gas emissions annually. And if you add the livestock emissions to all the other emissions that go along with food production, from farming, deforestation, and food waste, then what we eat is reported to be the number one contributor to global warming. So this is why there's all this focus on it. And this is what's driving consumer change. So we see this change in consumer trends. It was mentioned, I think, at the start by yourself, Sarah, towards flexitarian diets. And what consumers are seeking is substitutes for the product that they've come to love. You know, that good tasting dairy products and those meat products, they're looking for alternatives to that. And in turn, what's really interesting at the moment and what's exciting at the moment is this enables our food technologists to come up with great new products. So they're out there flat out inventing these new products to satisfy those desires and trying to replicate those taste, texture, and flavors. And they haven't got it quite right yet. But if you look at where we've come in the past couple of years, you know, those first products we tasted, which were plant-based, they tasted pretty awful, right? If you taste some of them now, it's pretty hard to tell the difference between a real meat patty and one of these plant-based alternatives. It's getting closer, and it will continue to get closer as well. The other interesting thing, and what I see is at the moment, is we're still mimicking products that we're used to. So plant-based alternatives, it's meat patties, or it's chickenless chicken, or it's alternative milks. We're still referring to it as milk. This is what I believe is happening at the moment in this transition phase. But it'll change. We'll start to come up with products that are new products that are just plant-based. We don't recognize them today, but we will learn to recognize them. So it's actually the consumers which are enabling us, which are enabling alternative proteins or plant proteins to become a viable method. It's not a new idea. Plant proteins have been around for a long time. It just hasn't been as viable as it is now due to this consumer change. And it's a positive thing. If we're able to do this, then we can produce food at a lot lower cost for the environment, which, if we go back to some of the discussion around climate change, is what we need to do. So, is it all just a fad? Is it going to come and go? Well, we can look at the current market. So, alternative protein market, it's valued at $19.5 billion currently. So it's already a pretty big market. If I look at some stats from the US, because we always look to the US for stats, then plant-based meat products grew by 23% last year. If we compare that to the growth in the retail food sector, that grew by only 2%. So it's completely outstripping the growth of its animal-based alternatives. And this is the same whether we talk about milk products, milk, dairy, yogurt. We see the same thing where the growth in plant-based products is outstripping that of animal-based counterparts. Plant-based milk. In the US, plant-based milk makes up 13% of retail milk sales. And we see that here in New Zealand as well. If we go to Countdown and you have a look, a couple of years back, you wouldn't have seen the alternatives that you see today. We've got coconut milk, soy milk, rice milk. There's a whole section of it now, and that's here in New Zealand in Canterbury. So it's real and it's coming. So what does all this mean for us here in New Zealand? What does this mean for us in Canterbury? It's a really interesting question, and New Zealand is full of innovative farmers and also business people that have used our natural resources, our climate, to create some world-leading businesses. That's in the meat sector, dairy sector, and wool sector. Today, this is our strength, but it's also our weakness. Our landscape is particularly dominated by dairy, which creates that economic risk. And this is some of the fear that we talk about as well. It's led to an overconcentration in some locations, overconcentration of resources and also of capacity. And this has caused, we have to be open, and this has caused some major negative impacts on the environment. So the challenge we face is to reduce this, to unwind some of this negative environmental impact. And what I'd like us to do is to see that plant-based products or alternative proteins is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to diversify. So, as a little bit of an example, I can talk about what we're doing at Leaf Foods. We think that there's an opportunity here. If we look at raw plant material, so green leaf material, we can extract products which are highly desirable directly for human consumption. So we can take those, we can push them into food ingredients. We can hire great food technologists that turn this into magical new products that humans are interested in, or that consumers are interested in. And at the same time, we can reduce the protein load in the byproduct. And if we're able to do that, then if we reduce or optimize the amount of protein going into an animal, into ruminants, we can also optimize or reduce the amount of nitrogen coming out the other end. So at the moment, if we look at our green grasses, they got, this time of year, I was measuring some the other day, it's got 34% protein. It was some lucerne that is actually grown on the Lincoln farm, so it's probably, the best in Canterbury, of course. But that's extremely high to be feeding into an animal system. If we're able to optimize that down to 20%, for example, we're able to reduce the amount of nitrate leaching coming out the other end and improve our water quality. So this is not an either-or thing where we have to compete with alternative proteins. If we're smart about this, we're able to integrate them into our existing farming systems and get co-benefit from this, create other value chains. So I think this is an opportunity for New Zealand to lead the way. We've always led the way in farming, and if we are smart about, get smart scientists on board that are able to help us solve some of these challenges and look for these opportunities, this is for sure a benefit for us and actually an opportunity to satisfy those environmental challenges that we face. So with that, thank you very much, and look forward to some interesting questions in the panel discussion.
Fantastic. I'm just double checking we've got this lectern mic. Don't we just put it a wee bit higher? Is that okay? Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Now, I have written down many, many questions, and I bet you've all got some burning questions as well. I mean, there's a lot of high-level ideological stuff explained within your presentations that, should they all pull off, the world would be a wonderful, better place. But the cynic in me starts to think about the systemic issues that we have to get to that point. And I can see a lot of farmers here in the room, Mr. Jex Blake down the back there, and realise that this isn't straightforward, and it does take a lot of support across the industry. There is, of course, the challenges of collaboration and the Kiwi culture of collaborating. We're really shit at it. And so I've got a few questions myself just to start the discussion and get the ball rolling. I've got Victoria here with a roving mic. Just put your hand up. Please introduce yourself, and please don't ask a question without the microphone so that the camera here that's filming can hear you as well. I hope I'm not the only one in the room that needs explanation on a free air CO2 enrichment trial. Would you mind explaining what CO2 enrichment means, just to kick us off?
Thank you, Sarah. So we know that the CO2 levels are rising in our atmosphere. So researchers from around the world, going back more than 20 years, set up research trials to get foresight on what that would mean. So as I said very quickly in my talk, they're called FACE trials, and they are around the world. So, and some of the ones in the so our FACE trials have, as you can imagine, massive CO2 cylinders in the corner, and they have these circles. They look like a space landing site, and the circles are quite large. Looking to my colleagues down the back, if anyone knows, they're maybe 15 metres across, and they pump CO2-enriched air across them continuously. So the pasture growing underneath is growing in a CO2-enriched environment. And then what we are doing is looking at the impact on, and sheep come in and graze it. So it's not grazed continuously, it's grazed like rotationally. And so what we are doing is measuring the impact on pasture growth, on pasture composition, on soil carbon, on soil organic matter. And we've been doing that for 15 years. So we already know, and you'll see the publications around the world about what it means for arable cropping under CO2 enrichment. It's come from that work. The work in the US also has big heaters, so they are mimicking higher air temperature. Our science budget's not quite so big in New Zealand, so we've just got CO2 enrichment. So it's fantastic because the science has already got the data about what it means for the future.
Wonderful. Susan, I've got a question for you. You spoke a lot about they needing to tell our existing story better, and it is becoming, in my opinion, a broken record because we're detached from the supplier story through to the consumer and the way our value chain is structured. What is a way that someone in your role in ANZ can be doing to actually support that getting through to the consumer?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really, it isn't simple to try and connect all the dots all the way through the system, and our supply chain is reasonably fragmented, and our customers tend to sit on the opposite side of the world to us. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do this. And we're already seeing some processors doing that and encouraging how things are produced on farm by rewarding with higher prices, and then passing that messaging through to their customers and vice versa. At the moment, what we're seeing is sort of being done on a collective basis rather than getting right down to individual farm stories. And we're seeing a lot of work from the likes of the processors or industry good organisations like Beef and Lamb, promoting the general concept of how we're doing things. But I think it does need to get down to the individual farm level. And but I do believe technology. I'm not probably the technology expert in the room. Actually, I'm the person who struggles to turn my computer on. So I'm certainly not the person who's going to tell you how this is going to happen. But someone smart will figure it out, and there'll be platforms where data can go in and stories can go in and consumers can connect. I'm not convinced that kind of the current social media platforms we have are quite right for this, but. Maybe I just don't know how to use them. But I think there will be ways that we can connect and push messages one way, and also understand our customers and get feedback from them the other way as well. And we will eventually connect all the way from the consumer right through to the farm and vice versa.
Lastly, I'll just ask Ross another question while you're busy thinking about yours. Ross, as a startup here in New Zealand doing something extremely innovative, can you tell us how supported you've been by things like Callaghan, the SFF, if that's something MPI, or is it a real challenge, and what needs to change?
Yeah, good question. So it was an interesting one for me. I came back from overseas, spent 8 years out of New Zealand. And I think it's incredibly supportive. So the likes of Callaghan, we're privileged enough to have a Callaghan grant to kickstart us, and yeah, we've also, of course, in discussions with other people as well. But there is an environment of support. The challenge is to connect the dots. So from a research side, we have some incredibly smart scientists and people in New Zealand. I would say for me, it's a little bit of a challenge to find out where they're all located and make my way around all the CRIs. So you have to work a little bit hard to uncover some of these people, but if you do, then they're there. And there's not any particular reason why you need to go overseas. I think we have the brains and the intelligence here in New Zealand. When we started this, we thought that we'd have to go overseas sooner to find certain capabilities, but that hasn't been the case. So they are here. We just need to look for them and get them out in the open a little bit.
True Kiwi ingenuity.
Yeah.
Now, anyone here, I've got still a long list of questions, but I get to interview people for my job, so please use this as a platform and opportunity to ask some questions of the panellists.
Good morning. I'm Ivan Laurie from the Foundation for Arable Research. I have a question for the panel. Obviously, we have been looking at a huge amount of alternative crops in several programs, as some of them were mentioned today. The challenges facing the commercialization are the big roadblock for us. We know the science is there. We know we have growers who can grow fantastic crops. I would like to know from the panel how they envisage a value chain model that can return significant premiums, not just a premium to the growers, to equate the margins per hectare to what they might be getting today, say under dairy. And as an example of this, we are also tenants of Lincoln University, and in order to do the right thing, we grew protein crops last year. We had an excellent crop of fava beans, went out to negotiate. The best price we could obtain was $500 a ton. At that price, we are about 35 to 40% of what an average dairy gross margin would be per hectare. How does the panel see a profit share scheme that could work back to the growers in any of the innovative foods?
Ivan, I'm going to start by saying these two have to answer that, because I am absolutely with you. And I was at the Farfield Day 2 years ago at Chertsey, because I'm with you. The science is there and has been on for a long time. And one of our esteemed arable farmers said, there's nothing new here. And we were looking at quinoa and a range of things. And I said, well, there is one thing that's new, and that is the world is now eating quinoa and all of those other ancient grains. How do we get the value back to the farmers? So I think these guys need to answer that, because I'm with you. We know how to grow it. How do we get the opportunity that delivers to the farmers, not to a middle person? Susan.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always useful to have really ambitious goals too to start with, and if you target here, you might get to here. So just trying to do a little bit better is not gonna see the changes we need. But I think we are. I guess any business proposition stacks up where it's all based on risk, and everything's assessed on risk. And the more certainty around understanding where the consumer demand is, what's driving these things, where different, where it fits, where the risks are in right from the production right through to the price points. Understanding that risk really, really well really helps with funding, because everything is sort of risk assessed when it's funded. So understanding that structure really does help. And there is we're seeing more and more funding and money becoming available that sort of specifically targeting environmental things that are sustainable, basically. And we are seeing people accepting lower returns for investments that they actually feel good about as well, not just investing. So there's probably some opportunities. I haven't got all the answers, but
Susan, I get that, but we keep defaulting back to dairying in Canterbury because Ivan, the gap is so big, isn't it? Ross, are you going to save us?
Try to. So this is a really good question, right? And this is the challenge. So I probably think about this a little bit differently. What you talked about fava beans, pea protein is the other example, and I completely agree that it's going to be challenging to be competitive on any level, especially with dairy, if we go down that path. These are already established products, and I would almost go as far to call them commodities. We've got to be thinking about new opportunities, creating ingredients or products that are really highly desirable. There are products out there. So what we look at is proteins which have significant advantages over pea protein, for example. Ones that don't have any taste profile with them or any of that bitter planty flavour. If you're able to extract these kind of products, these are fetching a different market, it's a different level in terms of price and value. there are other opportunities in that as well. There's a whole lot of compounds in plant material that are becoming more and more desirable. If we think about things, for example, like bioplastics, the production of lactic acid, which is originally coming from a plant material, this is starting to gain momentum now. So if we can diversify and look at those products, take what we can valorize out of plants, and utilize that, and then the remainder product, put that into a dairy operation or a beef operation and valorize it that way.
Or fish food?
Or fish food. Yeah, fish food as well.
And probably just like to finish on that question as well. Just if we do fully price in the externalities that dairy, from a dairy operation, and it still comes out the highest return, well, we'll just keep dairying. That's the best thing to do.
Ooh. Solace on that note.
Morning, Solis Norton from Deer Industry New Zealand. Deer farmers and farmers more generally, there's a well-known phrase that you need to be in the black to be green and to follow a lot of the opportunities that we're looking to pursue. Rural debt's high at around 60 plus billion and growing, more than double our annual ag export value. What's ANZ's role and plan for addressing this over the next 20 years?
Sorry, addressing exactly which bit? Sorry, just
Helping farmers reduce rural debt.
yeah. Well, we're just asking people to start paying back some of that debt. That's a simple answer. But I think what we are seeing is a lot more, I guess, what I would call responsible lending, and a lot more consideration to individual farm units, and being quite honest with farmers when we believe they have too much debt. We're also, we're encouraging sustainable practices, and funding that slightly differently to some of our other lending. But we certainly, and there is certainly some people who have got too much debt, but I don't necessarily think debt across, across all of ag in general is so much of a concern. It's just how it's distributed at the moment. There is some concerns.
Just following on from that, the highest indebted farmers are the ones that we are trying to encourage to transition. So it makes it extremely hard when you're in that position to transition. Ooh, that rhymed.
Yeah, and for some farms, the debt levels are restricting what they are able to do. Absolutely, and it is a challenge. So we're encouraging people to reduce debt and to be in a better position to make good choices in the future.
Oh, you've got the mic. Oh, well done.
Just Craig Trotto, an interested bystander. Just curious to know what you're describing. I think as two differentiated consumer pools, isn't it? Because we continue to go on and on about creating a clean and green image and consuming what we consider our traditional high-end consumer products. But further to your point, Ross, extrapolating higher quality protein contents to create new different food type products. And is it fair to say that what we are describing here today is two ends of or two differentiated consumer pools, chasing that traditional high-end consumer product what farmers are producing today, but then exploring different innovative food types and products that are more likeable or more required by the new consumer?
Yeah, shall I answer that? I'll totally agree. That is what we're talking about. We're still going to have dairy, we're still going to have meat. It's not changing. We want to be doing that, producing those products, in my opinion, to the best of our capability. So if we can be the country that's producing the most environmentally friendliest beef or dairy, then that's what we should be doing, and I think we've got an opportunity to do that. And at the other end of the scale, like you said, I'd like to see New Zealand involved in those emerging markets, chasing the latest thing, right? Those really interesting products or ingredients, and leading in some of that area, because it's very much complementary. We can do that part at the same time as we're still satisfying our existing markets and actually benefiting our existing markets is my belief.
Yeah, and I think there's another point to that. We've been growing arable crops in Canterbury, North Otago, and Lower North Island for a very long time. And we sell faba beans at $500 a tonne, and we sell wheat at whatever. And we import our wheat from Australia to make our bread in so much of New Zealand. So we need the opportunity that the businesses Ross is part of to see us pushing further up that value chain, which, as you're saying, is creating that higher value product, because we can. We've got fabulous sunshine, we've got water, we've got a future with more growing degree days. So our options are getting bigger, aren't they?
Exactly.
Greater. But we've got to go up the value chain. And if processing and understanding our consumers, we need that whole part of the chain to do that, don't we? I mean, we can't produce an Impossible Burger in New Zealand because we can't make the ingredients, can we?
Correct.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so really?
Exactly.
Just following on from some of those questions and one of Susan's answers, and then combining that through with Ross and then Robin's comments there. Two questions. One, because we're all here to talk about markets and future of food, but I always think about how does regulation either inhibit or promote that as well. But we're also talking about the value chain there and investment in farm debt, and Solus just mentioned that before. It would seem to me that investment, and Ivan's point about not being able to get the money that they needed in terms of gross margin from the faba beans. What percentage, Susan, of investment is going into businesses like Leaf or agri-technology businesses that are able to provide a framework or be a company that our farmers can sell to in order to maintain higher returns and then in turn reduce farm debt? So if you could give us an indication of that. And just wondering if anyone could comment on the regulatory context both for lending and also for on-farm, and how that either inhibits or promotes sustainable food production.
As always, Megan Hand's excellent questions.
Yeah. Certainly questions that are difficult to answer. I mean, I really don't know what portion of lending is going into companies that are involved in the innovative space. It's not something I'm privy to in my research role. But I guess any investment is looking towards what's going to be sustainable in the future. And sustainability, I mean, was one of our criteria across all, bank lending now. Sustainability comes across every conversation, whether it be at the farm level or at a big institutional business level. Those conversations are constantly there. So we're certainly moving more towards funding more sustainable businesses and moving away from funding things we don't see as sustainable in the future. That hasn't fully answered your question. I appreciate it.
Question down the back. Can we guys have some volume on the mic? Thanks.
Hi, Annie McLaren from Sinlay. Just a couple of questions for Ross. The first one is just a bit of clarity about how your model would work in a dairy system. Are you looking at extracting your product from grass silage, and if so, obviously the benefit there for those dairy farmers is lower N concentration in their feed, but is there a greenhouse gas impact there? And also, how would that transaction look financially for those dairy farmers? And the second question, sorry I got a bit greedy on the mic, but you're talking about a consumer that is decided to go plant-based or make a decision based on either the climatic impact, or if they're vegan, then they're making a moral choice to do that. Is it a bit misleading that you're getting your product out of a dairy market or a beef market when consumers are making their decision to not align with those industries?
Yep, so two good questions there. Maybe on the first one, just a little bit of clarity around what we're doing. So we see there's two parts to it. We see a consumer demand there for alternative protein, and if we look into New Zealand, then we see a challenge we've got with reducing if we look at water quality in Canterbury as a topical discussion, about improving that water quality or reducing the amount of N we're putting into waterways. And very briefly, in that, therefore, there's an opportunity to take some of that N or take some of that protein and deliver it directly to consumers. So fundamentally, that's the model on that side of it. And it's about making the best use out of the plant. So if we can bypass the cow, which is quite inefficient in a lot of ways, or very inefficient in a lot of ways. I know I'm talking to a room of dairy farmers. New Zealand's ones are the best, but still. Then we should do that. We should do that. It's going to have a reduced impact on the environment if we're able to do that. But with plant materials, some of it, we don't have 4 stomachs as humans, so some of it is really well suited for animals, and that portion of the plant should go towards animals. So that's how we see it. The economics behind that, look, that's a different story, and I can happily discuss that with you afterwards. But what we're creating is a feed product back into animal feed systems, or animal systems, which has advantages, right? So it should fetch a good price in that regard. Your second point in regards to consumers, and if we're the fact that what we're talking about does include animals. Yeah, it's true. So there's people make their food choices for a whole variety of reasons, be that climate, be that health, be that animal welfare. We're not going to hide away from the fact that this model does include animals. I think it's the right thing to do from a science point of view. And it's actually the right thing to do from an overall efficiency, right? How we get the most out of our land use and how we feed that population. And there's a significant market, or our assessment would be that there's a significant market in this flexitarian area, which understand that. And as long as we're showing the numbers and we're backing this up, that it is overall better for the environment, then we're proud to be a part of that.
Just in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, reducing the nitrogen content
Oh,
will not lower the greenhouse gas emissions.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
But if you're growing crops like lucerne, we're very, at the moment we're seeing an expansion of lifestyle blocks taking up our best soil. What if you drove around and harvested off all of those lifestyle blocks and paid them, and we turned that soil back into a high-producing food production system? Wow.
And they don't have to mow it anymore.
Exactly. Think of that petrol saved. Yeah, it's triple win. Yeah.
Can I have a microphone just down the front? Sorry, I've just got someone who's been patiently waiting. Victoria over there on the left, and then down the back before we'll wrap up.
Hi, my name's Nicole Marshall. I'm one of the new ECAN councillors. Robin, you've made a couple of really good points in your talk. We already know what we need to do, but you also raised, are we opportunity ready? We've had a lot of conversation around the level of debt in the rural community. I've heard a lot of stories before I was an ECAN councillor or as an ECAN staff member about how farmers are so constrained by having to service their debt that if they don't make a certain purchase, that their bank's on the phone saying, why are you spending differently, when the farmer's trying to adapt their farming system. How, I do rate, we've got BNZ in the room, thanks Susan. Are the banks enabling people to adapt, to be more opportunity ready, to lower their footprint, or are farmers being unnecessarily constrained by their debt?
I think that Susan made a point that not all farmers are constrained by their debt, and there certainly are farmers for whom debt, it's not only debt, it's availability of capital. And as Susan said, a lot of these things is a risk profile. Backing up a little bit, I think we are in a space, and Megan talked about regulation coming down. Is our system optimised right now? So some of those things I talked about with sheep and beef farmers, in all industries we have a range of current production, and I think when we think about systems that have become quite intensified, am I getting the return from what I'm already putting in? And I'm seeing Megan nodding her head. Am I getting that return? There are those questions before we get to that other investment. And that other investment need then starts to raise an issue, I think, Susan, about are we looking to a future of different business models? We already see it in Canterbury with things like potato production, where farmers lease areas of their farms. Are we going to see the emergence of that kind of investment, which is a whole change about letting other people farm your land as well. So you're right, and we still have to see opportunity. And opportunity may be being more profitable in the current system I'm doing by doing things differently and meeting my regulatory requirements as well. Yeah.
Question down the back, and we'll just wrap that up after that.
Hi, Katie Vickers from Farmlands. We've talked, and thank you all for your presentations today, they've been really interesting, but today we've talked quite a lot about the consumer, and I just have a question for the panel. In order for us to get more value from what we're producing currently and with the same amount of land use, I think we need to probably understand exactly who our consumer is as a primary sector. If we ran New Zealand as a business, you'd have a value proposition, you'd understand who exactly it is that you're targeting and what market. At the moment, we're currently quite broad, just interested to hear your views on that.
I mean, the way I see consumers and consumer needs, there's a whole matrix of consumers out there, all with slightly different needs. In terms of who are our consumers from a geographical point of view, we are moving more and more towards selling product to Asia. So by value of our primary products, nearly half of what we sell now goes to Asia, and I expect that will continue to grow because their economic growth rates are stronger than other parts of the world. Their populations are growing, and their per capita incomes are lifting. So the demand for food is continuing to grow, and we're quite well aligned. It's not so far to send our food into those Asian markets, and generally there's varying needs within those markets. There's some real basic nutritional needs, but there's also the higher end that are really have really strong needs around, I guess, traceability and knowing that the food product that they're getting is safe and is also, you know, of really high nutritional quality as well. So the needs do differ, and I think, you know, for individual companies to succeed, it's targeting, you know, certain groups of customers, really understanding that, but then passing that information right back to each individual farmer. So when you're doing things on farm, you know in the back of your mind who your end consumer is and what their needs are and how they will value what you're doing. So I think that's where we've got a real opportunity.
And I think we're seeing that in some of our industries, and I guess I'm thinking beef and lambs taste pure nature. You know, they've taken quite a different pathway. But there's some companies in New Zealand, and some of them are in the room here, who have got their consumer understanding. You know, they've built that, and they're building off the back of that. And so I think we're already doing that. And as a farm systems scientist, last year for the first time, part of our research funding and one of our proposals actually went into part of the group that was working on consumers. So even from our biophysical science, we get that part of what will shape farm systems is demand. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more or less all already said. Each business is going to have their own market that they're targeting. You know, we're a small country. We're not feeding the whole globe, so we have to be. We've got an opportunity to target those more niche markets and that higher value, and I believe that's where we should be focusing. And in some companies are already doing that very well in New Zealand, and there's plenty of examples of that. And I'd just like to see more companies pushing in that direction.
Thank you so much to our three panellists. It's great to see, as we say, an interdisciplinary approach to our challenges that we face and how complex our food and farming systems are. I'd like to actually, I forgot earlier, I would like to take the opportunity to make a special thanks to the ECAN councillors that have made an effort to come along today. I think that shows a great commitment to the future of Canterbury's farming, and thank you very much for taking the time to come along. Just before I wrap up, I just want to make a note in regards to quadrupling price needs a very good, compelling story, and the value is in the story as opposed to the detail. Has anybody heard of the first carbon negative fashion brand on earth? And it includes a sheep with every purchase. It's happening here in New Zealand. It's called Sheep Inc., run by Jeff Ross, who founded 42 Below and is now the proud owner of Lake Harwell Station. Let's think differently. On that note, I'd like a round of applause for our panellists. We'd like to make an apology for the food that wasn't available on arrival. However, it is, I believe, down the back now. We're going to take a short break, and before our second session called Climate Smart Food Production, we were going to hear from Alan Lim from Jade Gardens in the horticulture sector, Seth Lawrenson from Ag Research, and Juliet Maitland from Sinlay and the work that they're doing. So please join us for the next seminar. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the show over the next 3 days. Thank you.